Welcome to RotoGrinders Today. I'm Jordan Cooper, a.k.a. BlenderHD, BlenderHD. If you want to follow me on Twitter. And it's Friday, September 22nd. We'll be taking a look at some DFS strategy for the NFL Week 3 slate, the main slate, DraftKings and FanDuel on Sunday, as well as some MMA stuff. It's Fighting Friday, right? And we could talk about MMA because we got Fighting Friday extraordinaire as well as two-game slate extraordinaire. It's John Breslin, a.k.a. SQUIRRELPATROL, the newest member of the $1 Million Club. This I believe that this is your first $1 Million win.
It is, yeah, it absolutely is. So I got my green button, hopefully, on my RotoGrinders profile, or hopefully it's coming soon. I should check that and see if it's up yet. I've been chasing that green button for a while now, and did not expect it to come on a 2-game NFL slate, but I will take it.
But your construction strategy was similar to my own. I mean, like, I like the two-gamer type of slates. You have to play like Showdown, right? And the most common thing that the field doesn't do in relation, we look at Showdown contests of like, oh, a lot of people are building like, last night, 5-1 49ers, very popular type of construction. On these two-game slates, a lot of times when you're playing on like Thanksgiving, those types of slates, I always find that overstacking, the field does less of. So you could actually play semi-chalky players, maybe leave a bunch of salary on the table, and then find leverage in the best spots you can. So like your lineup just really adheres to, like, I'm gonna stack the Saints Panthers game, right? Play the lowest owned quarterback, play all the common people, and just, well, who's the two most owned people on the slate? Chubb and Sanders. I'm just gonna play the other guys.
Right. So, and I played a bunch of Chubb and Sanders, and I realized like it's a difficult thing when you're doing content because they'll ask who's your favorite?
Well, your 5-star gold lock of the day, right?
And like my highest owned running back was Nick Chubb. I think I had 50% or more, like maybe 55% Nick Chubb. Just the field had like 88% or something absurd. And so like I was like 30-something% under the field on Nick Chubb, and that had to go somewhere. And I was like thrilled because like the first thing as soon as I saw like, oh, I'm gonna win, started like listening to the show I did with Head Chopper, like the pregame show, and I started looking at like the expert survey. Like I want to make sure like I was putting the plays down, and like there's a clip of me saying like I love the backup running backs, and the reason wasn't really I think the starters are going to get injured. The reason was just it's a 2-game slate. Neither team total is up to 40 points. And, like backup running backs get touchdowns all the time. And so if there's going to be very few touchdowns on this slate, like there's a good chance that like the backup running backs get the touchdowns rather than the starters. And I was playing more for that than for
right. Compared to the ownership. I mean, like, to me, it's an ownership thing. If I told you that Nick Chubb was going to be 56% owned and Jerome Ford was going to be 22% owned, that's a much different story than when Nick Chubb is 88% owned and Jerome Ford is 4% owned.
Exactly. And so it's an ownership thing, and it is like the actual plays on the field once the game starts are so like variant. Like my thought process actually did work out even after Nick Chubb went down. Like Jerome Ford got like a 70-yard touchdown run, went out at the 1, and Pierre Strong came in and got the touchdown. Of course, nobody's playing Pierre Strong, so it didn't really matter. And the 70 or 80-yard that run that Jerome Ford got was good enough, because people were actually playing him. But yeah, it's like I think obviously people kind of underestimate the variance in the game, and that gets reflected in ownership.
Right, and that's why on any in DFS in general, not just NFL, I always say I lean towards and embrace the variance when the ownership dictates that you should. So we'll talk about MMA in a little bit. Like if one of these knockout artists, the type of guys that really have 5 minutes to score a knockout in the first round, like even though they may have a very high chance of doing that, like if the field is playing those people, I tend to be underweight on them. And then when people are afraid because it's like, well, can this $9,600 guy get a first round finish? And people are scared, like, and he comes in under-owned. I play more of them because people don't like that type of variance, and I do the same in NFL of like, what if, especially, dude, Squirrel Patrol, especially in NFL, right? 2 weeks
Yeah.
of sample size, people think they know, and they don't know.
Yeah. Actually, I tried to run it back last night, going way underweight Christian McCaffrey, and that did not work out.
No.
Doesn't always work out, but when it does, the payout can be big. So
Right. Talking about ownership, Taylor Smith does have a free article up on rotogrinders.com. NFL DFS DraftKings ownership projections, week 3 notes and advice. We do have free content for NFL up on rotogrinders.com. We also have premium content. Right. John writes an article. He'll have his MMA underdog. Typically, John, you look at MMA very similar to I do. You look at the inside the distance lines and compare them to ownership for, well, his first round odds are this, and he's only going to be that. Like, why not take a shot? It sounds disgusting, but yeah, 14% may be too low for this underdog when, he does have a 24% chance of winning inside the distance for that price.
yeah, so I like the MMA slate this weekend a little bit better than the football slate, which I know people don't want to hear. But it's a little bit harder to get away from the chalk, I think, in NFL this week. Whereas like MMA, you've always got crazy stuff happening. So actually, I've got my UFC tags in, but not my NFL tags.
Okay, well, we'll talk about UFC at the end of the show, but let's talk about the chalk. Right, we have all the content here, Roto Grinders. We have lineup HQ. We have our projections, our ownership, which obviously needs, we need to update stuff. We have, injury news that we're waiting on. I think the big one is whether or not Austin Eckler is going to play and whether or not Josh Kelly, we go back to the well there. But you said it may be hard to avoid the chalk this week. Since I want to be GPP focused for DFS strategy, we're going to be talking a lot about like game stacks. What games are we targeting? You're playing one quarterback, multiple pass catchers. 2, sometimes you're stacking with 3. Maybe you're playing a run back, 1 run back, maybe 2 run backs, depending on price. So this is very similar to the past, game stacks, sports analytics shows that I've done in the past. And I've already run lineups with a combination of blitz and Roto Grinders projections. Obviously the Josh Kelly, like our RG projections have Eckler in, the blitz has him out, so you kind of have to finagle your way around there. I have it. This may not be a contrarian take, right? Because people are used to coming to me for the vomit stacks. I think that the Chargers Vikings game, while it being the obvious spot, the total is like significantly higher than all the other ones. Based on running lineups, even at the ownership levels that we have it at, I still have that game as a bit under-owned.
Right. Yeah. So it's our first Coors Field slate of the NFL season. It's the slate where we have one game total that just like stands out above everything else, and so that makes the NFL slate a little bit of like a binary decision. Like, are you game stacking? Because you should probably be game stacking something. So are you game stacking that game, or are you going with one of the other games that has a less chance of hitting? And this week, like that Chargers Minnesota game has like a much better chance of hitting than any of the other games. Like that's just simply reflected in the game total.
So we have on the Viking side, you have the Cousins stack, which is pretty much Cousins, Jefferson, you probably add Hawkinson or Osborne or Addison. On the other side, you have Herbert plus Allen, Herbert plus Williams. You could even play Herbert plus Kelly plus Williams. I mean, you could do stuff like that. You obviously have these tight ends. You have Everett. You have Parham. You could throw in even a $3,300 Josh Palmer in the mix. If this spot is going to be owned, right, even though it may still be under-owned, I tend to think of chalk spots very similar to baseball, where that Coors Field game, I'm not a big fan of playing one-offs, high-owned one-offs from the chalk game, because if those one-offs hit, it's more likely that other people on the team has hit as well. And then there are lineups that have stacks of that, and I can't beat those lineups. So I get more of the sense that, like, I'm much more likely to either, if I have two of pieces in this game, because I like doing secondary correlations of like, oh, Josh Kelly on one side, Justin Jefferson on the other side, or Alexander Madison on one side and Keenan Allen on the other side, like, and then have another stack in my lineup. I'm much less likely to do that on this slate. That because if those two pieces hit, it's much more likely that Herbert, Cousins, like the more of the game stack would have hit. Are you thinking similarly, or are you more, or are you willing to play guys like Kelly if Eckler is out at running back, or Jefferson by himself, because Jefferson could be the highest scoring wide receiver even if the game doesn't like go over its total?
Yeah, I actually think I'm okay with playing these guys as one-offs, because there's a couple of like details, like context, that the quarterbacks, neither one of the quarterbacks is very rushing focused. So like, could you have a possibility where like Justin Fields gets 2 rushing touchdowns, and also like the Chargers Minnesota game is like doing well, but Justin Jefferson is really just the focus of the Minnesota offense. That seems like plausible to me, and like, especially on DraftKings where uh like reception, the full point per reception. Like, well, what if Justin Jefferson and Keenan Allen are just piling up receptions and get the touchdowns? Like, so maybe you have like a mini stack, right, of like Jefferson and Keenan Allen, but like some other game does go over its total, or doesn't even just necessarily go over its total, but like, yeah, like the Justin Fields gets like two rushing touchdowns, or Lamar Jackson, like, same situation, and like, and they're not necessarily, they're like doing really well, but like not with a full game stack. And meanwhile, like the offense is just totally concentrated in this Minnesota Chargers game. So like I will have some lineups, that a good number of lineups that have like a game stack from another game, but like a mini game stack from this game.
Okay, because it's just so higher than everything. I mean,
Yeah.
I said on Wednesday with Noto that it's going to be very hard for me not to play some piece of this game in almost every lineup.
Yeah, I think that's kind of how I'm thinking, and that actually comes pretty easily, even when you're just like running lineups in lineup HQ. Like if you say like, no, I want to force a Mahomes Kelsey stack no matter what, you're probably going to get some pieces, and just run, you just lock those guys in and run some lineups. Like you're going to get some. The other pieces are going to be from this Minnesota Chargers game because it's like the highest projected game.
Talking about the Mahomes stack, I have that as overowned. It's the highest total. It's the highest implied total, right? 30, because I mean they're favored by 12.5.
Yeah.
The projections on these guys, it's just that it's KC could score 30 points and no one gets there because it's just it goes everywhere. I'm much more likely out of all the pieces to play Kelsey because he could just, I mean, he could score 30 points and no other tight end could put up past 10. And you just have a scarcity thing of like, everyone has to play a tight end, right? So if you get one that you play Kelsey and you have 20 more points than everyone else, that helps you. But from a stack perspective, like I'm not enamored playing, even a Mahomes, Kelsey plus DJ Moore type of thing. I just have that as overowned. I almost think that I'm more likely to play Isaiah Pacheco as a one-off in this game. I think he may still be a little overowned. What are your thoughts on the Chiefs in general? Because to me, I find it like it's very hard to stack the Chiefs outside of the two main pieces, but the two main pieces are also absurdly expensive.
Yeah, exactly. They're a frustrating team, and like particularly on DraftKings where salary tends to matter a little bit more. Like it's a little bit easier to get like the studs on FanDuel. On DraftKings, it's like I'm actually surprised when I do what I just described, like just lock in Mahomes and Kelsey and run some optimal lineups. Like that, those lineups end up being like far less highly projected than I would expect because they're so expensive. But Travis Kelsey is that guy that can like really exceed anybody else at the tight end position. And he's actually not that much more expensive. Like I think Hawkinson's like only $700 cheaper, but like $700 is a lot. But it's not like Kelsey is like leaps and bounds more expensive. And sometimes sometimes he puts up games of like 30 and other tight ends just totally fail. And it's like you needed to have Kelsey. So something is a little bit interesting is like maybe you go Justin Fields, DJ Moore, Travis Kelsey, because you can kind of see all of the offense all of the passing offense going through Kelsey. And then Pacheco, I'm interested in maybe you're pairing him with the Kansas City defense a little bit more, and then running, and then like not having any other pieces from that game.
So let's talk about some other games. What games are on your radar to stack that you think is going to be under-owned? Because remember, it's not about what are the best games. It's what are the best games in comparison to their ownership. I have my list of 4. I have 4 under-owned, 4 over-owned. It's very similar to the Game Stack show. I would be on with Tuttle talking about this. So what would be one of your picks of a game that you're targeting because you believe that the stack and the run back is under-owned?
So like a handful of games, like I like the Colts and Baltimore, but the weather could be a little bit of a factor. I was kind of prepared coming into the season because I love playing Lamar Jackson, especially on FanDuel. Like the rushing touchdowns count like a little bit more. Like they don't count as more, but there's less points coming from like receptions and like the 100, the yardage bonuses. So I've always loved playing Lamar Jackson. But this coming into the season, I was like, like he may not rush as much. Like he's got like the contract, like the new offensive coordinator, but his running backs keep going down. So he's gonna have to start rushing. So like that's a game where I could see like the point total isn't as high, and the spread is like 8 points. But if it is closer, it could be higher scoring. But it is also so weather is maybe going to be an impact a little bit earlier. We don't necessarily always think of like September weather as being a big impact on the NFL, but like Kevin Roth is saying, like we could have major storms this weekend. It seems to be like the latest forecast seems to be a little bit better. Like it might have, stuff might have cleared on the East Coast by game time. But yeah, I mean, like let's say it's really rainy. Like maybe Lamar Jackson is having to rush a little bit more. And then we also I don't think we know the stats of Anthony Richardson yet.
I'm assuming he's not going to play. I'm assuming it's going to be Minshew.
Yeah, I don't know that it makes a huge difference for the Colts passing offense. Because like Richardson's good. He's a really promising rookie. And he looks like he might be the most promising so far, out of that quarterback class. But it's also this would be his 3rd NFL game. So and like Minshew is a pretty good backup. So like I don't know that it actually affects how I feel about that game. Although I'm probably more interested in playing Richardson than playing Minshew, if that makes sense. But like neither one of them would be like hugely owned for me. Like maybe a little more interested in the Baltimore side of that.
Right, and it looks like an Odell Beckham may not play, and that actually would be more. I mean, I'd be much more inclined now to Lamar plus Flowers plus Andrews, something like that, and especially Andrews. Same thing at the tight end position, like the guys that could totally obliterate the tight end position. I like playing more of than the field because the field tends to tries to find the 3K guy that could give you 10 points, and a lot of times they fail and just give you 3. So even if Richardson plays, I'm much more inclined to play the Lamar side. Single stack, double stack. Less people do the double stack. Run it back with a Zach. Zach Moss may be somewhat popular, if he's going to play like all the snaps and everything like that. Gus Edwards may actually get some increased ownership if we have Justice Hill that probably won't play, but they signed Kenyon Drake. They have Melvin Gordon. I know that these are like corpses, but the Ravens are not the type of team that take running backs and use them 90% of the time. Gus Edwards gets like no targets. So you're like very touchdown dependent. So to me, I have this game, barring the total not keep on coming down because of the weather, like seems to me that why can't I just do Lamar, Flowers, Andrews, Moss, and there's my stack.
Yeah, exactly. And like that's surprisingly affordable. And like Zay Flowers has like real promise. Like he might be a real NFL wide receiver. Like just watching the first game. So second game wasn't as strong, but like the first game, like Lamar Jackson was just looking his way. It felt like almost every play. So yeah, that's a game stack I like. And then actually, like the Atlanta Detroit game, I think has
Okay,
some
good.
promise.
We're both on the same page, John. We're like you're going down my list of what's the most under-owned games,
Yeah,
right? We Chargers Vikings, even though it's chalk, I still have it as under-owned.
under own.
My number one under-owned game, my number two under-owned game was Indianapolis Baltimore. My number one under-owned game is what you just talked about right now, Atlanta at Detroit in the Dome. People are going to be scared. This is my vomit stack take of the week. I think you could play Desmond Ritter. I think Jared Goff, I think, especially if Amon-Ra St. Brown is healthy and plays, I don't think he's going to be owned much in the high end of wide receiver. I think Gibbs will get some love. Dude, playing like Goff, Amon-Ra, Sam Laporta, and then running it back with London or Bijan or maybe not Algier, but like Kyle Pitts in the tight end spot. Like, and I don't have no problem playing Ritter, London, Pitts with the, Amon-Ra bring back. I mean, this game, the key part of this game, John, I think is Detroit's offense has to be efficient, because if Detroit's offense isn't efficient, the Falcons and Arthur Smith will just make this game really, really slow and ugly.
Yeah. So I think this is a game maybe I'm more likely to just game stack and not necessarily have secondary pieces, because I think this game, like the Chargers Minnesota game is going to put up some points, and it's a question like if it goes 70, you need a full game stack. If it's going like 50, which is like still 4 points under the total, then maybe like you're getting away with some one offs and there's like concentrated offense that allows you to just game stack another game. This game, I could see it like going over its point total. I could, and if it goes like 50 points, like some of these players are pretty cheap. If it, then so maybe that's the game stack that you need. But I could also see it hitting like 42 points, 40 points, because like Atlanta just likes to run the ball. But if Detroit is scoring and Atlanta can't just run the ball, then maybe this is like starting, these players are starting to like feed off of each other. And if you're getting like long plays that end drives and hand the ball back to the other team now with a sudden deficit of 7 points, then like they're having to open the game up a little bit more.
And also, they have big play guys. I mean, we're talking about Jamar Gibbs could break one, Bijan, Drake London, Kyle Pitts, Josh Reynolds. I mean, Amon-Ra is a little bit more of a possession receiver, but I mean, he gets 30+% target share anyway. I mean, these are big play guys. You're playing this game you hope for big plays that speed things up, and offenses have to try to keep up with the scoring. But if that doesn't happen, it's much more likely that like no one from this game gets there.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm been a kind of a Jamar Gibbs fan, because I expected him to get more usage as the season goes on. Like everybody wants to play rookies in week one because they're like the new shiny thing. But generally, coaches don't like to throw rookies in there like in week one, when they're still like learning the playbook, or learning how to like play in an NFL game. So now if David Montgomery is out, that's maybe happening a little bit early, but it's at a time when I would expect Gibbs to maybe be getting more and more work naturally anyway. So I think like the Craig Reynolds effect is a concern, but Gibbs might actually, he's like what 6,600 on DraftKings. I could see him like outperforming that price.
Now, I have a sneaky game. That's my third most under-owned. But before getting to that, obviously hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell. I want to talk about some over-owned games, right? I have very similarly to the Kansas City game, I have Josh Allen stacks as over-owned, because the Buffalo team total is actually, it's 25. And a lot of times when we're playing Josh Allen, they're playing at home and they have 28, 29, 30-point team totals. I know they're practically they're about a touchdown favorite. The Commanders' defense is pretty decent. I mean, I'm not saying that Buffalo is going to be like chalky or anything like that, But at the prices that they are, playing Allen plus Diggs, types of plus Kincaid, I mean, any of these guys as one-offs, I think, is fine. But I think the overall price of something like that with a McLaurin or a Jahan Dotson run back, like if anything, I'm much more likely to play Howell sides just for the price and not Allen at the head of this stack.
Yeah, it's a lot. Allen's like 8,100. Like Mahomes and Allen are a decent chunk more expensive than the other quarterbacks. And I agree. Like Allen, like the Washington defense is pretty good. This game's going to be like outdoors in Washington, so Buffalo's going to have to be on the road, and it might be raining. Like at least like very sloppy field conditions. It's not like a game that I love the like, and they're expensive too. Like Diggs and Allen are expensive. Uh, I actually agree. I think like playing Sam Howell on the opposite side, like Howell has some rushing upside, so like maybe that's how you would want to stack this game. But especially with the weather concerns, it's not a game that I'm looking to it as being a main part of my builds on Sunday.
Okay, here's a game that I have as over-owned. Maybe we'll get into a debate. Maybe you think otherwise. Houston, Jacksonville. I'm not doubting that this game could be a shootout, but compared to ownership, I think these Texans receivers like Collins and Tank Dell, people love playing Calvin Ridley. The people want to play Lawrence is typically more owned than he should be on a lot of slates. So I think people want to play Etienne, right, against the Texans run defense. I see like oh, people are gonna go. I'm gonna play Lawrence plus Kirk plus Ridley, run it back with Collins or Dell. I think it's fine. I just think it's overowned. That when you have chalk receivers from a team that is on the road with an 18 implied team total, like I hate the thinking in DFS, especially for ceiling, of I want to play the guys that are going to be down 2 touchdowns. It's like, no, I want to play the guys that score the 2 touchdowns that make the other team go behind. So like I tend to lean away from these kind of chalky situations where people are relying on CJ Stroud dropping back 50 times because the team is behind.
Right. Yeah, I mean, implied point total means like so much. I feel like it's one of the things that's most highly correlated with like fantasy player success is implied point total. So yeah, you got to realize when you're dealing with like a point total that doesn't hit 20. Even if the guys are like underpriced, it's not necessarily somewhere you want to go. Having said that, like I do my Friday show, later today with JM to win. He absolutely loves Tank Dell, and he like thinks that he's like going to be a future star. So I'll probably be playing some Tank Dell, but also like Jacksonville offense just never seems to get there as much as you think it would. Like Etienne never seems to catch as many passes as you think he would. And like we kind of still waiting for that offense like to hit its fantasy potential. I think they're like a decent team, but like the fantasy scoring can be hard to come by, and like they have a bunch of good receivers that's not necessarily good. Like we see that with Kansas City, that you can lose a lot of money trying to predict like which Kansas City receiver is going to catch the touchdowns this week. We know it's always going to be like Travis Kelce's doing really well. Like with Jacksonville, it's hard to pick from like Christian Kirk, Calvin Ridley, Zay Jones.
Evan Ingram. I mean, Evan Ingram's there also. I mean,
yeah,
he's not a schmo either.
Yeah.
I could see if you want Tank Dell as a one-off only because of price. Like Tank Dell could put up 20 points for 3,600. That's much more viable than going into chalk Nico Collins at 5,300. I mean, they're cheap, but I think that this is, if you look at mean projections, it's going to lean you to like, oh, you want to play Stroud. It's going to lead you to play Stroud, Collins, Dell, Etienne, and if you don't know how to use an optimizer, you may get more of that than you necessarily want.
Yeah, I mean, I think at 5,300, I think like CJ Stroud, if you want to play him in the Millie Maker, I think that makes sense. Like because we don't know what's going to happen. I think was it like Russell Wilson went nuts last week? I wasn't seeing that. And so like I'll have some CJ Stroud in like my 150 lineup build. that like I'm gonna probably put it to the million maker. But like I don't know if I'm gonna be like over the field on him. I mean, I might have 3 to 5% seems about right. Um, but it's not a game I'm gonna like focus on for single entry or anything like that.
Do you have a game that you think is going to be over owned?
Uh, it's hard to say. Like I don't know how nuts the ownership on the Chargers Minnesota game will go because like you're saying, like you're showing it as being under owned. Well, a lot of people might see that. That I think a lot of people, a lot of people are going to pull out their phones and go, oh, what game has the highest total when they like go to enter their one lineup? Oh, this Chargers Minnesota game, it looks like it's got a high point total. Like over owned. I don't know. I think so much ownership is going to go there that
You don't think people are going to go? Enough people are going to go, especially if Waddle is out. They're going to go, oh, well, I'm going to play Tua plus Hill plus Durham Smythe. Run it back with like Javonte Williams or Cortland Sutton or something like that. Miami has a 27 implied total, and it's hard for me to gauge. I think it's weird for me to say. I have more interest in Tyreek Hill if Waddle plays than if Waddle doesn't, because I think that'll limit his ownership more. He'll project better with Waddle out. But then I have to think on the other end, maybe I want him out because maybe in large field contests, too many more people are still going to play Jefferson, and I'd rather have a better projected Hill at a similar ownership anyway.
Yeah. I actually kind of like Raheem Mostert in this game, which maybe like Mostert is maybe a one-off that makes sense if you're doing like a Chargers Minnesota game stack, because you put him in there, and then maybe you're saying that game's a little bit of a slower grinding game, where Miami gets ahead, and then they're running Mostert, and Mostert's getting the touchdowns. I agree, like Tyreek Hill could see really high ownership if Waddles is out. But he's also like Waddle's in. He's always a player that can go berserk.
Right. Here's the sneaky stack. I don't know if you're gonna like this. Geno Smith plus Metcalf or Lockett. Basically play. I can play Kenneth Walker even with them. Miles Sanders, the corpse of Adam Thielen, right? Jonathan Mingo. Some of these Panthers, people are going to see, Bryce Young's out. Andy Dalton's in. Spoiler alert. Andy Dalton's a better quarterback than Bryce Young, right? Yeah, they're playing.
Bryce Young just won me $1 million.
Right, of course. But I mean, truthfully, I think the Panthers offense will actually play better under Andy Dalton. See, the typical knock on Seattle is that they're not the type of team that runs up the score. So to me, like if the Panthers offense is actually effective, and it's not like the Seahawks defense is great. If Miles Sanders breaks one, like the Seahawks have Pete Carroll has no problem letting Geno Smith drop back 40 plus times to throw the ball to the talent they have at wide receiver with like JSN also. So like, I'm not a big fan of like playing these guys necessarily as one-offs, but as part of a stack, compared to the other games on the slate, it's like what are you going to do? Like the Jets and the Patriots? I just look at the ownership here, and I just don't think many people got burned by Miles Sanders on a 2-game slate. People tend to not like playing Kenny Walker, and I just look at these guys and go, like Metcalf or Lockett both have 100 plus 2 touchdowns in their range of outcomes any game. Why not take a shot on the Panthers actually putting up points, forcing the Seahawks to throw the ball?
Yeah, I actually am more interested, I think, in playing Carolina players, like having a Carolina stack and adding a Seattle player than vice versa, if that makes sense. I like the idea
like Dalton, like the problem is that like, but other than Sanders, most of these like Carolina pieces are players that you look at and you go, what's the average age of these skill positions?
Yeah, well, Jonathan Mingo is a rookie, and he got 8 targets on Monday night. So Like I think that's a place you can go. It's only 3,400. Like Miles Sanders is pretty affordable. Like it's 5,700 for a running back that catches passes. Now maybe he has a quarterback that's going to dump it off a little bit more, so it could be piling up some more receptions in weeks 1 and 2. And he rushed for like 1,200 yards or whatever last year. And you're getting him for 5,700. So if I go to this game, like I think like maybe like a Miles Sanders, like Mingo, Andy Dalton, like it's a vomit stack, but that's what
Right.
what
I
we're
love
here
the
for.
vomit stacks.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yep. So
Yeah, but
yeah, and then like you can pair that with a Seattle receiver.
yeah, because in running lineups, I'm not saying I got a lot of this game, but I got a lot more than the ownership would warrant.
Yeah, no, I think it's definitely like a plausible game stack. Of like the lower point total games, that's the one that this is like the one that I might like. Like I don't really want to go to like Dallas, Arizona, like New Orleans, Green Bay, like Tennessee, Cleveland. Like I feel like those are games that are just best left alone. Like there's nothing that requires you to play something from each game.
Right.
So like this is maybe the game from the lower point totals, like the 43 and under, probably the one that I have the most interest in.
And you like looking at the tool that Jamino has, the NFL DFS Optimal Stacks tool,
I'm
right?
actually required to look at it because I have to write an article interpreting the
Oh,
results
right.
every
This is
week.
this is a premium tool based
Yeah.
on our current ownership and RG projections. It runs through 10,000 iterations of lineups and basically different. I mean, this is not, just one type of stack, but it just means at least the quarterback with one teammate. How often did these lineups show up in the top 0.1% of lineups compared to the projected ownership? And this is a tool that you could use to quickly look at. I run lineups, so I run ceiling projections. I run, and I take a look at all this. This is a little bit more precise of a method of doing so. So obviously, I'm not going to show anything because it's a premium, right? You got to go behind the paywall, right? So click on that link in the description, get $10 off your first month. But you always mention this, John, on all your. I mean, for every sport, we typically have some type of sim tool like this that shows, slate IQ, optimal stacks. Even for UFC, we have that as well.
Yeah, we do actually. The UFC one just came out over the kind of over the summer, and so I was looking at the results. Like Yumino was like sending me this is what it's spitting out, and then we started publishing it. I feel like it didn't get enough like fanfare. And I think we talked about this last week that like the results like visually don't look as strong sometimes as they are. Like when you see somebody that's like, oh, they're showing up as optimal 28% of the time and they're owned 14% of the time. Like people are, it's a 14% difference.
That's
Doesn't mean much.
100%
It's
different.
100% difference. Yeah, so like if you give me the offer of 100% ROI, I will take that offer. Like every day. So yeah, I think these tools are like pretty powerful. But I like the idea of like running this kind of stuff and then interpreting the results. I think is important, and maybe looking at this stuff consistently and seeing like, okay, like it seems like the highest owned quarterback or the highest owned or the highest priced quarterback or the highest priced fighter is often like less optimal than you would think because of the possibility of them getting like priced off the line, right? Like they can still put up a high score, but they have to put up a really high score to like end up on that winning lineup.
Well, talking about MMA, it's that we have a fighter like that,
Yeah.
Jacob Malkoun, right? You already have him tagged.
Yeah.
Right, Jacob Malkoun, who I mean, it's an 11 fight slate, which I wish I like bigger slates. So finding a way to get unique. It's a weird slate that it's like whoever made this card said almost every fight is a striker versus a grappler. The ITD lines are really not great in comparison to the past bunch of slates that we've played. Malkoun is a minus 650 favorite, biggest by far on the slate against Brundage, but he's only plus 115 inside the distance. I mean, you're kind of reliant on Malkoun taking him down like 8 or 9 times, and he could still get priced out. And it's not like Brundage doesn't have a wrestling background. Is this the type of slate where where you need to play Malkoun. Like, or you could think the other way, that because there are going to be so many, it looks like there'll be way more decisions than finishes, then maybe Malkoun putting up 110 at 9,500 may still be one of the highest scorers on the slate anyway.
Yeah, that's actually my thought on the card. One of the reasons I like the card is because people might look at Malkoun and they might look at the inside of the distance line and say, like, well, he might not get a finish. And he's like so expensive. I'm going to go past him. Like, I really don't like any of the 9,000 plus fighters other than Malkoun.
Are you sexist? Is it because they're women?
Was it? No, but they're unlikely to get a finish. Like, and they like Marina Rodriguez, we have a long history of her just not putting up points in wins,
Right.
like in 5-round wins. She like doesn't necessarily get to 100 points, and like at 9,300. So like now we're kind of maybe crossing her off. Mizuki, I think it's her first fight in like 3 years. Again, like not likely to get the first round finish, not particularly high volume. Vidal, same way. Like there are female fighters that are like high volume that I love to play because they're high volume, and people are like, oh, female fighter looks like she doesn't have a high inside the distance line. Like volume is something we kind of measure, right? Like how often does she try to punch the other girl in the face? That's the thing that they count those stats. And it's like if the fighters don't have that, it's really difficult. Now, like Liam says on the Ground and Pound podcast, right? Like somebody can always slip on a banana peel, right? And we actually, we've seen that before. We actually had like 2 weird fights last week, right?
Last week we had a draw, we had
and a no contest,
and a no contest on the fight that I had like 80% of.
Yeah, and that was one of the highest owned fights. It was supposed to be like the big action fight. Well, somebody's gonna have to put up a lot of points, unless there's a no contest.
Right, that banana peel.
Yeah, exactly. It was like they both slipped on a banana peel, basically.
Well, the thing about the high priced female fighters typically is that they tend to go under owned.
Yeah.
So yeah, like you have Rodriguez, you have Mizuki, you have Vidal. Like we have them right now as 14, 23, and 27% owned. I'm going to tell you a little secret, John. They're going to be lower owned than that. Right. So like if this was the actual, if Vidal was 27% owned, I'd be with you. The problem is I think Rodriguez literally comes in at single digit ownership, and Mizuki comes in at like 12 and Vidal comes in at like 16. And at that point, at that point, if you tell me that Vidal is 16% owned, like she's plus 195 inside the distance, that's 34%. Plus 500 in the first round, that's 17%. Like, dude, if Rodriguez is plus 700 in the first round, right? So like all these women are like 13 to 17% to win in the first round, which is 90 plus points, which is good for this card. Like if the ownership ducks underneath that number, I know it's less likely, but on an 11 fight card, if you cross out these three female fighters, it's less probable, but then you start running into you're playing lineups that are duped 64 times.
Yeah. So we'll see where ownership goes. I always like to play fighters. Like in my 150 set, I'm gonna have fighters generally owned at least at their round 1 like finish probability. So like, and like Marina Rodriguez, I think is at like about 10 or 11%. Like I think he's at like plus 700. So it's like maybe 11-12%. So like that, like, that's probably what I'll own her at. So and
right, so it's just to be clear, it's an 11 fight card. There's 22 fighters. You play 150 lineups. You'll have every fighter in your pool in at least one lineup.
Yeah, absolutely. Cody Brundage is maybe a fighter that I might be under the field on his even his. Well, I guess we got.
I don't think he's going to be 4. I don't think he's going to be 4% on. I think he'll be higher than 4% on.
Yeah, I think he'll be higher than 4%. I like Waterson Gomez a little bit more. Just like the kind of color commentary from everything I've listened to this week on Brundage just isn't that good. And and I like Malkoun a lot. So Brundage, I think he's a late I think he's a late replacement for this fight. I'd have to look up on topology. But this kind of screams like Brundage is out of his, on his way out of the UFC, and then they had a late had to find somebody that could make weights on short notice or whatever. And like, hey, how would you like one more fight? And he's taking it, but he just hasn't looked good in his last fights. And so he's, I guess, 4%. I actually probably will be over the field on him,
Right.
but he should be owned higher than 4%, no matter what. I think his first round finish probability is like all over the place. Like his odds are all over the place from
Yeah,
what I
I've
can
seen
see.
plus 450. Like that's what I have in my sheet.
Yeah, plus 450 is actually like really good for his price. But
Yeah.
I've also seen it at like plus 1700. So like I think I'm gonna have to like actually take a minute. Like I look at like the kind of best fight odds and fight odds IO that like
Right.
aggregate the different like sports books. And I'm like, this might be an error somewhere. Like,
Yeah,
all right,
so
I have to like,
some books are sharper than others, just to be
yeah,
clear. Like some books I
yeah,
don't care
like
what they put up.
right. Like I would given the choice between the plus 450 that I've seen and the plus 1700, maybe go with the plus 1700 if I'm if I'm betting it. Um, But yeah, so the odds are a little bit all over the place. But yeah, I actually like Watson Gomez a little bit more for her ability to actually put up like points at 6,900. Like she might actually in a or a 3 round decision, if she scores like 70 something points, maybe that can sneak onto the optimal lineup. Whereas like Brundage probably needs a win to
Right.
land on the optimal.
I think the same thing for Ige. Like I think Ige. I mean, a lot of these matchups are striker versus grappler. People, I think, are going to side more on the Bryce Mitchell side.
Yeah.
We've seen Bryce Mitchell like he should do well and then gets knocked out. I mean, like
Right.
right. So like it's a lot of these fights are if the grappler could grapple, they should have been the favorite because AJ Fletcher is that type on the underdog side against Brian Battle is like AJ Fletcher from a DFS perspective should be able to put up 100 plus points in a win. The problem is that after 5 minutes, his gas tank is gone, and then he gets finished in the second or third round by whoever the hell he's facing.
Yeah. Actually, I kind of like Brian Battle as the favorite there. I wouldn't be surprised if the ownership goes a little bit more towards AJ Fletcher because he's going to show a bunch of points in his game log at a pretty affordable price. I think that'll be tempting for people. And then I kind of like the Brian Battle side. Like I like going with the other underdogs and then playing like Brian Battle because I think Fletcher could see outsized ownership. And like Ige is one of my favorite fighters on the card because I think Bryce Mitchell's got some name value and he's favored, so I think people are going to go there. Whereas like Ige is only 7,400, like that's it, and he's an active, like fairly high paced fighter. Like he's put up like 100-point wins before in the UFC, so I like going with Ige. Like at 7,400, with a win, he stands a really good chance of landing on the winning lineup. I know his win odds, yeah, we've got it there, like 36%. His ownership's only 24. Like that's a bad discrepancy. Like I'll be over the field on that 24.
Lastly, before we get out of here, your stance on the main event: Fiziev 8,500, Gamrot 7,700. I mean, in general, I tend to be under on main event fighters because they tend to be over owned, but that's not really all dependent on price. So 8,500, 7,700, they have a easier time to make the optimal lineup, and on a card where the finish, the ITD lines are not like the best. Like I like fading like main events that are they may go 4 rounds when there's 5 fights that have a like minus 135, minus 200 ITD. Like hey, there's 14 fights on the card and like 6 of the fights are going to end in the first round. It's like, dude, I don't need a main event fighter. I know I'm typically under on the main event, but this seems like I'm much more likely to have Fiziev or Gamrot in my lineups just because if Fiziev wins, it's either going to be an early knockout or he'll win by points at the end, which at 8,500 probably is still fine. And Gamrot, if he wins, it's probably going to come with like 5 or 6 takedowns, and he may be the highest scorer on the entire slate anyway. So, like at 7,700, how do I not play Gamrot?
Yeah, I like Gamrot a lot more than Fiziev. I don't have like a strong take on who's going to win the fight, but I think Gamrot will score much better if he wins. Like Fiziev is like the disaster with a 5-round title fight or a 5-round main event is that like, well, what if the guy just gets a kind of low scoring 3rd round win? Like then he's just like any other fighter on the card. like I think that's like Fiziev's like at risk for that, of getting that like third round or fourth round win. Or like if he gets an early fourth round win, that's kind of a disaster. And he's getting the finish. It's inside the distance, but like you're not getting the 90 points. You're getting the lower points. For the third and fourth round.
You're getting like 75 to 78, and that may not be enough at 8,500.
Yeah, so like, what was it, like 46% ownership there? I'll probably be a little bit under the field. Like, I'm not gonna like fade him entirely. And for cash games, I think it's a fine fight to like stack both fighters in the 5-round fight. But I like being a little bit over that number, that ownership number on Gamrot, and a little bit under the number on Fiziev. And you keep saying 11 fights. We have weigh-ins in 5 minutes. It's 11 fights right now.
It may not be 11 fights. It could be 10 fights. Right. Oh,
yeah.
Geez.
I think Ricardo Ramos missed weight by 9 pounds last time.
Oh, yeah, you're right. You're right. Absolutely right. So you'll have content coming out today for the MMA stuff. You have your tags up in Lineup HQ. You can get all of this premium content and premium tools, all of our projections here at RotoGrinders by clicking on the link in the description. Get a combo premium package. You get NFL, you get NBA, you get college football, you get soccer, you get everything, right? PGA, whatever you want. Take whatever you want. Click on that link in the description. Get $10 off your first month, and you'll be back. You'll be back on the YouTube channel later today with the solo ship show. That is a free show.
Yes, I think so. It's out on YouTube. I always click on it on YouTube, and
okay. So we're good, dude. Right? People can check you out there. Anything else that you're coming out with this week, content wise on RotoGrinders?
Yeah, well, so I have my Stacks article. It's like the interpretation of the Domino simulations, and then on UFC pre-lock show tomorrow, and then Sunday on at 11 a.m. with Eric Biamfor. So I guess that's free as well. Then right back on the primetime pre-lock on Monday with Head Chopper.
Great, so check that out. Hit the thumbs up button on your way out the door. Hit the notification bell to know when we go live. Subscribe to the channel if you're new here. You could always send in your mailbag questions to questions@theoryofdfs.com. We always talk about DFS strategy here. Props and pick them as well. Right, we'll be back on Monday. I'll have James McCool. We'll go over the week 3 slate. Hopefully everyone here is profitable. That's what I hope so. Just don't dupe me. Just don't dupe me, right? That's all. And let me get first, and you guys can get second. I have a lot of conditions, John, right? So if you're going to play MMA and you're in the main GPP, I'm going to take solo first. You're going to take solo second. And if not, I don't mind reversing that. That's perfectly
all right.
fine.
Sounds like a good plan.
Okay, so this is the place to get all of your strategic content for DFS, props, and pick 'em. What you're thinking about when you're building your lineups today. Monday through Friday, 11 o'clock Eastern on RotoGrinders Today.